Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an exclusive and exciting episode of The Inside Factor. I'm joined here today by a very prominent figure in South African politics, Mr. Floyd Shivambu, the Deputy President of the fastest growing organization on the African continent. DP, welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having us, and I want to congratulate you for establishing a formidable media alternate platform, which is inconsistent with the dominant media narratives that have otherwise been reproducing what the establishment wishes. So congratulations to yourselves as Inside Factor for having a platform which unashamedly articulates or gives platform for alternate perspectives and views.
No, thank you very much, DP. Now, congratulations to you as well and the organization. 8 years, milestone. What has contributed to this baby to become a force to be reckoned with today?
I think that the major contribution for the EFF's sustenance and growth is its dependable and consistent ideological framework and posture. So if you're an organization that is not consistent in terms of what you stand for, there was not going to be an organization that lasted this long. But also you will remember that when the EFF was founded in 2013, there was no prominent and formidable left political organization. All the organizations that existed here in South Africa were representing the interest of the capitalist establishment. So the EFF came as an organization that truly was representing the people, because if you look into the diagnosis that was made in the founding manifesto of the EFF, you realize that we said that all organizations, including those that refer to themselves as left organizations or as communist organizations, were otherwise bullied into supporting a common program called the National Development Plan, which is underpinned by neoliberal politics and wrong ideological underpinnings in terms of what is it to achieve. So the EFF then came in as to fill a vacuum of which existed of left political organizations, and is the only serious political organization that ascribes to Marxism-Leninism and pursues unapologetically a socialist agenda. So that is what gave us the relevance that continues to define the growth of the organization thus far.
Now, when you said in that meeting, when you were forming the EFF, and the question was asked, what is to be done? Did you see yourself being in parliament?
Look, you remember that the genesis of the EFF, at least from a public point of view, was on the 11th of June 2013. When we issued the statement, we called it the clarion call to all the economic freedom fighters, stand up and be counted. That is how it was phrased as a topic of on the 11th of June 2013. And then it then said that there's been a generation in the Congress movement and in other formations that has been fighting for economic emancipation, mostly around the issues of the land, expropriation of land without compensation, nationalization of mines, banks, and other strategic sectors of the economy, building state capacity, and a variety of other components that are now in the founding and manifesto and constitution of the EFF as the 7 cardinal pillars. And we say that let us stand up be counted, but before we then take a decision of what is to be done, let us then call a National Assembly on what is to be done, to then answer a question on what option do we opt for out of just pursuing the struggle for economic emancipation within the existing political parties, or forming a non-profit, non-governmental organization that is not going to contest political power, or form a political organization that should then pursue the struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime. And then between the 11th of June 2013 and the 26th and 27th of July 2013, there had been several consultations, community meetings and engagements in various parts of South Africa. So all provinces, by the time we went to that National Assembly on what is to be done, had constituted interim structures that says that we want to facilitate the response to this question. And the overwhelming response on the 26th of July 2013 was that we must form the economic freedom movement as a political organization that must fight for political power in the immediate through elections, but it must fight for political power through whatever revolutionary means possible, as long as that such is underpinned by what the masses are looking for. So if the masses are prevented from fighting for real economic emancipation, if they are prevented to exercise their democratic right in a voting system, there has to be a discussion of what is an alternate revolutionary means to achieve economic freedom in our lifetime. So that was the responding outcome of the 26th and 27th of July in Uncle Tom's Hall in Soweto, which then founded the EFF as an organization. And you will know that after that, we went to then start prepare for elections and contested for the provincial and national elections, which were taking place on the 8th of May 2014. So within like 8 months of the existence of the EFF, we're able to get about 1.1 million votes and got represented in all the provincial legislatures in South Africa. And we were the first political party formed post-1994, formed post the ANC, by the way, a black political party which got to be represented in all the provincial legislatures. No one has ever been able to achieve that. Not even the IFP or UDM, they've always been regional parties. So the national character of the EFF found expression before it even could celebrate its first anniversary as an organization. So it's an organization that the people have been waiting for. It's an organization that is going to stay for the longest time.
Now, you've mentioned that it's an organization that the people are waiting for. I've realized that many African countries now are beginning to open up EFF branches, EFF structures. Do you think we are ready to see an African-led revolution led by fighters throughout the continent?
Yeah, look, we have currently a revolutionary activists from different parts of the continent. I think the most formidable of all these fighters who have constituted themselves into the EFF are the EFF structures in Liberia and then the ones in Namibia. In Namibia, they contested in the previous general elections, and the EFF in Namibia has got 2 members of parliament in the National Assembly of 288 or 86 people in Namibia. So only have got 2 members now, and there's a possibility that we might gain more traction. And then in Ghana, we've got the Economic Freedom Fighters, but there's also a formidable organization that ascribes to what the EFF stands for, called the Economic Freedom League. They have been leading the most militant struggles in Ghana in terms of challenging the status quo and in terms of what happens. They had difference in terms of how they should approach the previous elections, and they could have gained something if they had contested. We've got the EFF in Swaziland. The current uprising in Swaziland is led by the EFF Eswatini. So no one can tell that history anyhow, because it is the Economic Freedom Fighters which went to the street on the date, to commemorate the date where Sobusa banned political parties in Swaziland, to say that we are now defining a different agenda in Swaziland in terms of what should happen. And I can tell you now that at the pace that the uprisings is taken in Swaziland, it is going to lead to fundamental changes in the politics of Eswatini. I think the time of the absolute monarchy is coming to an end now because of the Economic Freedom Fighters. Eswatini. These Economic Freedom Fighters as well in Lesotho in terms of what happens. And this is what we said far much earlier. If you check in one of the political reports, even before the first National Assembly on what is to be done, the Commander-in-Chief was speaking in some instances that whilst political freedom came from the north and from the west of Africa and everything else, the winds for economic emancipation are going to blow from the south upward. We're going to realize economic emancipation, which is going to be inspired by what we stand for here in the continent. And what does that mean? It means that we as indigenous Africans must reclaim our economy, we must reclaim our land, we must reclaim our wealth, the mineral resources, we must build our own industrial capacity, we must have our own capacity to do our own things, because currently we continue the entire continent to be neo-colonial states that are directed and micromanaged by the former colonizers.
Now you're speaking about the need to own our own resources as the African continent, and I know there's an issue which you feel so passionate about, the illicit financial flows in our continent. And how important is that, and how much money are we losing as a continent through these illicit financial flows?
So currently, in terms of what happens in the entire continent, the continent loses more than 88 billion US dollars annually to illicit financial flows and tax avoidance practices. They call it base erosion because when you are taking all that resources out, you are eroding the base upon which you should be collecting revenue to fund education, healthcare, and a variety of other social needs and services. So most of these companies that are extracting our natural resources in the entire African continent, they do not record the resources that they are extracting properly in the countries that they're extracting from. They then sell to themselves in the tax havens, in Bermuda, in the Virgin Islands, in a variety of other destinations, in Luxembourg, and then they then say to the country where the mineral resources are coming from that we did not make any profit. And as a result, you are not going to tax us anything. You know, like taxation works in a way that you only tax people out of their profit. So if they have made a loss, you do not tax them. So all these minerals extractions and oil extracting companies, they almost always declare losses in terms of the revenue which they're generating here in the continent. But then they always bloat the expenses, and then they say we've got marketing services from our subsidiary companies elsewhere. So our cost of production is very high, we don't have to pay tax. So there's a lot of tax which is being lost here in the continent. But there's even a far much more dire reality and phenomenon in other parts of the continent, in the DRC. So a lot of African countries do not have control of their airspaces. So most of these global capitalist multinational corporations, they discover diamond mines or cobalt or a variety of other minerals. They set up a mine there and build a landing strip there. Come and land there and live with the minerals without even having recorded it at all. Not even just tax avoidance. It's just resource theft that continues to define the African continent. And it's one of the issues which, as part of gradually collapsing the borders in the continent, we should collapse the borders on air control of which airlines and which aircrafts enter the African space as a whole. We shouldn't be that vulnerable where we say that because the colonizers said that we're different countries, we don't even have a common air control system which is going to safeguard the entire continent. It's one of the things that define the entire continent in terms of where we are. And it can only take an economic emancipation movement to significantly disrupt the looting that is ongoing in the entire continent. If we do not have control of our natural resources, if we do not have control of our land, they will continue to ruthlessly extract our minerals. They're going to continue to avoid taxes. They're going to move billions of dollars out of the continent, and then they bring it as meager loans and aids which come as with conditionalities. So they say, no, like, well, we're going to give you aid. Like almost all these countries where the continent is taking its minerals to have got an aid program for the African continent. So you've got the US aid, which gives money to some social development programs. The UK has got aid, France, almost all of them. Because we are at the center of enrichment of the entire world, but we are not benefiting anything meaningful out of that.
Now, I can see and I can sense your passion for the African continent as you speak. And when you look through history, many African leaders who have come out, like Gaddafi, who have come out pro-Africa, who have come out to say, let's open up our borders, let's have one currency. Somewhere along the line, they face consequences and are dealt with by the powers that be. And I've seen you and CIC Julius Malema, you're not scared to challenge the powers that be. Are you scared that at some point during your political career that the Western powers, if you can call them, might come for you as well?
Look, I think the Western powers must be the ones that are scared of us. It must not be the other way around. Because if you're going to enter a revolution with a view that what if they kill me, they must be asking themselves, what if they take their resources and kill us, these people? They must be the ones that are scared. We must not enter a revolution with fear that, what if they kill me? Like they've killed a lot of our leaders. They've killed they removed Kwame Nkrumah from office by an illegal coup d'etat. They killed Thomas Sankara. They killed Patrice Lumumba. They killed a lot of. They removed Amilcar Cabral from power. All the prominent African leaders, like Sokoto, they destabilized the country when he refused to cooperate with the French colonial masters. Almost everywhere, wherever there is a revolutionary agenda, they've tried to isolate and banish. And then if you check in the context of South Africa, so everyone else who posed a real threat to the establishment, they're banished and isolated. Robert Mangaliso Sobuko was banished and isolated because he posed a real threat to the establishment of colonialism and apartheid here in South Africa. So of course we're all going to face that. But the attitude must not be we're going to be scared of that. The attitude is that we're going to fight until victory. And that is what we're determined to do, and we're doing that every day. And then of course, when they can't physically harm you, they cannot physically kill you, they will try to assassinate your character on a constant basis, raise all sorts of issues. That is the nature of being involved in a revolution. And whereas the revolutionary project that we're in pursuit of seeks to take wealth from those that have illfully and wrongfully gained it through colonization and apartheid and suppression of our people. So we must not be scared. We can't be scared if we're serious about this. But also we should reproduce ourselves. Like the aim of all revolutions and revolutionaries must be ideological and political reproduction. So there must be so many people in the entire African continent, within the EFF here in South Africa, who must be able to articulate the positions with clarity, without being fearful, with determination, who will be disciplined, who will be selfless as well. So that is one of the issues that we have to look into. Kwame Nkrumah reproduced themselves among so many leaders in the entire African continent. So if you check President Mugabe, Kenneth Kaunda, Julius Nyerere, Sokoto, almost all of them, they looked up to Kwame Nkrumah as a leader of the African Revolution. So ourselves, as well as leaders of the economic emancipation movement in the entire African continent, we should reproduce ourselves ideologically and politically. There must be Julius Malimas who are going to take on the struggles in Liberia, in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, everywhere. Wherever our people are deprived of their resources, there must be an economic emancipation movement that must lead the struggles for the total liberation of our people.
Now, 27 years into democracy, Black South Africans are landless, they're frustrated, they live in poverty. Do you think that we can attribute that to the lack of having a vanguard movement before the establishment of the EFF that has somewhat failed to provide a proper channel for Black South Africans?
Look, the reality is that upon seizure of political power, the liberation movement, the ANC, had already conceded to a lot of its revolutionary commitments, which some were contained in the Freedom Charter in terms of what it sought to achieve. Like, you know, in the Freedom Charter it says that all land shall be redistributed to those who work it. It says all land must be redistributed to those who work it. And then we then come with the policy proposal as the EFF in Parliament. Well, first, obviously, from the founding manifesto of the EFF, Cardinal Plan number 1 is expropriation of South Africa's land without compensation for equal redistribution. And then we then propose in Parliament, first time in 2016, that we should amend Section 25 of the Constitution to permit for expropriation of land without compensation. Then the ANC rejects it, and then they go to their 54th National Conference in 2017. And then that conference resolves that there must be expropriation of land without compensation. And again, we then tabled ourselves as the EFF motion in Parliament that let us now engage in the processes of amending Section 25 of the Constitution. But that parliamentary resolution, I want to give you this context, and it has to be a patient one. So, the resolution that was taken by Parliament, by the National Assembly, said that we should establish an ad hoc committee which must then work with the Constitutional Review Committee, which is going to conduct public hearings and get views from different sectors of society with the aim of amending Section 25 of the Constitution. And then it then says as number 2 that in doing so, it must take into consideration the aspect of making the state being the custodian of all South Africa's land. And that is the policy position of the EFF, which we had advocated successfully, to say that if we want to achieve the Freedom Charter objectives, let's say the charterists want to take that route, it says all land shall be redistributed or must be shared amongst those who work it. We're saying that instead of taking land reform through a piece-by-piece approach of saying, I'm going to identify this farm there and this farm, and then I'll give it to this family and that family, it doesn't work. Let us say that all of South Africa's land is under the custodianship of a democratic state so that we can equally redistribute it to all South Africans. We have engaged in long consultation processes. We have had several community engagements as Parliament on several occasions. The Constitutional Review Committee, the Ad hoc Committee, we have listened to so many submissions. And now at the tail end of that process, the ANC is selling out. It's like literally retreating on the expropriation of land without compensation. So if you go and read what they're proposing must be the final amendment, it still says that land cannot be expropriated without law of general application, but if it is expropriated, it must be subject to compensation. That is what they say. They also even want to retain, there's a clause, subsection 7 in the Constitution, that says that those who want to gain land for restitution purposes, like those who say that my land has been taken away, it must only be those whose land was taken post the 19th of June 1913. Now, you must check something about that, because if you go and check land ownership in 1913, 19th June, when the Land Act was passed, black people only had 7% of the land by that time. But the current South African Constitution forbids those who want to reclaim land for restitution purposes to do so if the land was not taken after the 19th of June 1913. That is a problematic thing. So the ANC has completely sold out. But it is being true to its character that it has always sold out as an organization. It is being true to its own DNA in terms of the being a middle class organization that is not committed to the true liberation of our people. Because if you were to check properly the history of this South African Natives National Congress, you will know that in many occasions, even before the banning, it has collaborated with the establishment. It was fighting for rights for civilized black men only. They used to submit petitions to the Queen and asking for collaboration. They were saying that at least recognize us who are educated. The rest they will see where they end up. It has never been a people's organization. It took that form when the Congress Youth League was formed, and when there was a defiance campaign and a variety of other programs that were pursued and then later on banned. But otherwise, now, the ANC has resorted back to 108 years ago, when it was an organization of educated black men who wanted civilized black men to be the ones that are included within the colonial government. So majority, if not all, the first 40 conferences of the ANC were addressed by the colonial or apartheid ministers of native affairs, because they were thinking that they were working together with the apartheid government. They had never been a revolutionary organization throughout the history. Maybe they're going back to what they were. So we have here an organization called the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is the only revolutionary emancipation movement that represents all the people, the indigenous masses of our people, who need their land, who need access to wealth, and wants to grow South Africa's economy so that we can defeat poverty much more decisively.
Now, what would you say to young black South Africans who are very frustrated with Parliament and with the constitution of this country for the lack of land reform, if I could say so, who are now saying that we no longer have trust in our members of Parliament. We must just go to the streets and take our own land. What would you say to black South Africans who feel that kind of way now?
I think that we said in Parliament that the ultra-judicial process of land redistribution must remain an option. It must not be ruled out. So if politicians are going to talk forever and talk without clear direction on the return of the land, I think there has to be consideration of different methods of land reform in South Africa. And I think that is what we should, in the EFF, talk now, like 8 years into existence of. Is this parliamentary route of land reform a much sustainable way of land reform? And there are the options of pursuing land reform in South Africa. So we have to look into that. I think it's one of the issues which either now as the organization, the Central Command Team, or the Third National People's Assembly must look into in terms of what happens. I mean, and not only in relation to the land question, even in relation to the minerals. You've got super rich mines that are coexisting with extremely poor communities. Go to Lonmin in Marikana, go to Korea where the other component of Lonmin is, in Moses Kotane municipality, in Rustenburg, and in all these areas where platinum is being extracted. And you see the poverty of our people there. Like there's practically nothing formalized anywhere. No toilets, no roads, no running water, absolutely nothing. And these are living side by side with extremely wealthy minds. Like if you check that report of the Falan Commission on Lonmin, in the period where workers were demanding 12,500, they were able to shift 2.5 billion rands to Bermuda as part of this transfer pricing phenomena which we had been highlighting in Parliament. Extremely rich communities, even if they were to take just half of that or even 10% of that, they could have been able to house everyone else decently there in Marikana. But the conditions of our people, of mine workers, the conditions of ordinary people which are living side by side where natural resources are being extracted. In Skokune where there is chrome extraction, the people are living in absolute poverty. And in Kimberley, in Kuruman, a lot of people are still now fighting to gain access to a relief fund which was given to deal with asbestos disease, which affected and infected almost all communities in Khatulopil. And that is what we are faced with, that the natural resources here in our country and in the entire African continent are an instrument of impoverishing our people. So just to have natural resources next to you makes your life even worse. Well, so it's supposed to be a different approach. So the question which the EFF we should look into moving forward is, what do we do with these mines that are not developing our communities? Should they continue to operate as if everything is normal? Can there be ways of forcing them to invest in the communities? Because the legislative route, the gazetted route has not worked. They've got social labor plans in their commitments and in their licensing, but they're not complying with any of those, and there's no consequences on that. And the communities are promised this and that, and nothing is happening. They're promised clinics, nothing is happening. There has to be a different method of struggle. Maybe the Third National People's Assembly of the EFF must deliberate on that. And of course, within our constitutional and within our ideological posture that says that we will fight for economic freedom, yes, through democratic means and through a participation in election, but through any other revolutionary means possible, as long as the masses are at the center of that struggle.
Now, would you say that there's no political will from those in government, or would you say that we've had black leaders who are in government, but we've never actually had a black government?
We are living in a neo-apartheid, neo-colonial state in South Africa. So what happened in 1994 was just a substitution of white politicians with black politicians, and the game continued to be the same game which was being played before. So you must go and check what Anglo-Americans said in 1987 when they were pushing for the transition to happen to have a black government. They said, let negotiations happen, and at the end of the day, negotiation must work, the rhetorics must be dropped, and we must continue to do business as usual. That is what Clem Santa from Anglo-American said in 1987 when they were doing scenario planning of what should be the post-apartheid South Africa. And that is what is basically happening. So they just substituted the politicians, and the politicians continue to be the executive that manages the common affairs of the bourgeoisie. And with the bourgeoisie, it's very few individuals who own almost everything here in South Africa. It's Johan Rupert, it's Christoph Wiese, it's Kors Becker, it's the Oppenheimers. They own the land, they own virtually everything. They've included a small section of black people, but majority of these black people who have been included partially are indebted to the same establishment. They control almost all the banks. They control almost all the retail chain stores. They control virtually everything. So like amongst those 4 or 5 capitalists in South Africa, there is not a single South African who can finish a day without having interacted with the product that comes from those people. That is the monopoly capital that continues to direct the affairs of this country. And they do so by threatening that if the politicians don't play their game, they're going to pull out, they will leave with their wealth and everything else there. So that is where we are as South Africa, where we are being managed by few capitalists for their self-enrichment, and they control everything else. And not only in the private sector, by the way. They benefit a lot from the public sector. Go and check how much Green Road, which is owned by Rem Group, benefits from clearing the SASSA grants every month. Go and check the banking fees. We don't have a state bank now. How much government loses to banks in its process of distributing social grants, in its process of paying salaries. You know, the salary bill of government is more than 600 billion annually. A huge component of that remains with the banks. And that is what we're living with. And who are owners of these banks? It's a very small group of people who are interconnected in terms of what they are in pursuit of. We have to dismantle this capitalist concentration in South Africa. And we can't do that through the Competition Commission. It has to be through a revolutionary political program that must take political power, obviously through the masses, and then take over the state and then take over the economy to give it to all the people of South Africa.
Now you've mentioned how the ANC has never been a revolutionary party. Now I want to come to you and I want to be personal. And I want to ask this, just to give you context. CIC Julius Malema during his birthday party says something very important. He says that Floyd Shivambu never left, was never expelled from the ANC. He took a decision to come with me as my brother. How important was it for you politically to leave this organization where you could have been a minister, you could have been a tenderpreneur, but you took a decision to join the unknown? How important was it for you politically?
Look, you know, the context is that when we led the ANC Youth League, we led a generational program there of economic freedom in our lifetime within the Congress movement. And it had gained significant traction in the Congress movement. So we had literally taken over the policy agenda and the ideological direction of the ANC as the ANC Youth League at that time. Because what we're talking about is the things that the ANC is supposed to talk about. It's the things which black people are supposed to talk about. You know, in the 2010 National General Council of the ANC, we as the ANC Youth League at that time were able to influence the ANC to agree, one, on the way it was phrased that time was that we must remove the willing seller, willing buyer principle on the land question. And then we had said that there was greater consensus on nationalization of mines. And you remember that we used to run a huge campaign on nationalization of mines, which we had found traction. And then they then realized that our generation had significant impact ideologically on the direction of the ANC. Like, it was to an extent where 95% of the whole National General Council of the ANC was agreeing with the youth league. And we're then beginning to prepare for the 52nd National Conference of the, if not 53rd National Conference of the ANC, which was going to take place in Mangaung. And we're beginning to say that if you are to be a leader of the ANC, you have to agree with our program, a generational program of economic freedom in our lifetime. And we're taking that leaf, by the way, from the founding generation of the ANC Youth League, of Mxolisi Majumbuzi, of Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, of Congress Mbata, of that generation which, when they went to the 1949 conference of the ANC, they said that those who do not ascribe to the 1948 program of the ANC Youth League will not be elected in that conference. That is how A.B. Ngoma was replaced by J.S. Moroka, who had just joined the ANC just the day before conference. And then Walter Sisulu became General Secretary or Secretary General of the ANC. And then they took over the program. And we then, taking a leaf from that generation, we then said that the 53rd conference must be a conference that must redefine the struggle here in South Africa. It can't be just, we're just going to seize opportunities of democracy when there are no opportunities. The struggle now should be economic freedom in our lifetime, and it is constituted by the return of our land, it's constituted of the nationalization of the mines, and they realized that we are gaining traction. Then the establishment was able to force the leadership of the ANC, the alliance between Jacob Zuma at that time and Gwede Mantashe, to then remove us from the leadership of the ANC. The president was expelled. I was suspended for 3 years. But because I was like, what is the purpose of just like remaining in an organization which, in its attempts to suppress a revolutionary program, would want to banish leaders and isolate them and all sorts of threats? Like they even bring in state institutions, SARS, this, then that, and all sorts of mechanisms. So every opportunity to try to criminalize whoever is standing for a program, they will use that. Then we say that, but this can be a vehicle to fight for the true liberation of our people. I knew far much earlier that the ANC can be a correct vehicle to fight for the total emancipation of our people. I argued far much strongly that there has to be a different platform to fight for economic freedom in our lifetime. So it was not even, I actually never even thought about it, that I'm leaving the ANC, there's going to be benefits. It's a natural thing that we have to pursue the struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime. And there has to be a different platform. If it means we start from zero with nothing, it's okay. Because involvement in politics and activism must not be about self-enrichment or what is self-convenient for you, that how do I benefit out of this? How do I personally benefit out of that? If the intention to get involved in politics is self-benefit, then you're then going to be involved in factions. And once you've got factionalism, you divide ideologically the purpose of an organization. So if it's about your self-enrichment, like it becomes problematic. We have had such elements in the EFF, majority of whom have left now. Immediately they arrive, they want to lead. Like, I want to have this position and I want to go to parliament. And then go to parliament, when you recall them, they say, no, this organization is a problem. Because they are not there for the mission. They are there for self-enrichment. I have never ever in my life understood politics or accepted politics as a way of self-promotion. Whatever responsibility that you are given, you take and fulfill with excellence, and then on consistent with what you believe in. It has never been about myself. I actually had never thought about it. Even when the president was talking about it, I was like, it's actually, for me, it was even a far much better option to leave the ANC. If, let's say, it was a personal thing, I never thought that it's like that. But the ANC has not and will never be a vehicle and an instrument in the hands of the working class and the poor in South Africa. It will never liberate our people. It has to be a different formation, and that formation currently is the economic freedom fighters, which, if we retain our ideological consistency and steadfastness, we are going to lead this country in the foreseeable future.
Now, I want to touch on the issue of SOEs. We see many of our SOEs are being sold. You see SA is gone now, many more are going to follow. Why do you think is happening in our country? And do you think that black South Africans are politically conscious enough to understand what is going on?
Look, so the current administration of Ramaphosa is in a program to systematically weaken the capacity of the state to do anything. So whatever is happening is a deliberate program in terms of what should happen. There are so many interventions which were proposed on what should be done with Eskom, but they continue to decapacitate it. They want to privatize energy generation. Like they are approving as many independent power producers as many as possible, so that later on they can say there's no need for Eskom to have the generation component. So first they break Eskom into three: generation, distribution, and transmission. So they are incapacitating all of them. They are disposing of SAA. And I can tell you that if you go deeper into who are the partners of Harris Fund, which is buying SAA, you'll find Remgro there. Remgro is Johan Rupert. And that is what you're going to find in almost all these state-owned companies. They are going to dispose later on of Praza. They will come with an argument that no, government cannot own this state-owned entity. What they're doing now in terms of the ports in relation to Transnet, there are components of Transnet which they want to give to the private sector as well. So the state will end up not having any strategic economic role to play. It will just be the most weakened state, and you can't drive development if you do not have strategic capacity as the state. The state always must have economic sectors that are important to guide all other sectors in terms of investments, to attract investments, and build industrial base that is going to then broaden the revenue base, but also create jobs for majority of our people. But the current direction is to incapacitate the state to zero, to nothing. We're just going to be administrators of social grants and few things. Otherwise, the direction that is being pursued by the current administration is to incapacitate the state, and that is not sustainable. If anything, we need to build bigger and stronger state capacity to perform its own functions, to be able to drive a proper industrial expansion program, which will defeat the poverty that defines our people much more decisively.
Now, before I ask my final question, I saw you on Twitter, if I could call it a tour with Emerald van Zyl regarding racist banks. And I just want to find out from you, as a deputy president of this eight-year-old organization, do you sometimes feel that the EFF is expected to do so much from South Africans? Whenever there is racism at the workplace, the first organization is the EFF. Whenever there's problems at schools, the first organization people want there is the EFF.
Yeah, look, we always take up all these issues as the EFF. Even the issue which you are talking about, we have paid attention to it on running up a campaign on the racist discrimination of banks on mostly black clients. We are fully aware of that. But we determine the pace and content and form and shape of our programs and campaigns as the EFF. So you can't say that because my taxis in Pudatichaba are coming late every time, the EFF must leave everything and go and push for taxis to come on time then. And then we must leave everything else to go and we determine our own program. What do we prioritize? That is why every year we then say this year is a year for public health. This year we're focusing on the financial sector. And this is what we're going to do systematically, all of us as an organization. So, and then of course people will always come to us whenever they are faced with the difficulties and they think that there is injustice committed elsewhere. And we respond, but we do that systematically. Like we are in the process now of gathering all data in terms of the discrimination of black clientele by all these financial institutions. such that when we then start this campaign, it's much more impactful. In some instances, we might even demand that black clients must be paid back the money which they were robbed by these banks, because that is effectively what is happening. So that is where it should be. So we can't just rush because someone tweeted that please campaign on this and then we must leave everything else to do it like that without having a systematic and structured, detailed attention to it. So that is what we're dealing with. And then of course we will always pick up the struggles that affect the ordinary people, and we attend to that. That is why here at the head office we have established a labor desk for those who have got labor disputes. We've got a gender desk, those who have got issues of gender-based violence and everything else. With time, we'll possibly have a financial services desk as well, where people who are robbed by insurance companies, people who are robbed by these funeral policies, because there are funeral policies that are created all over, which do not pay people on time and all of those things, and then they disorganize people's bereavement processes. There are people who are robbed by banks and different financial institutions. There has to be a consideration later on as well to say that what are the remedies currently? Government systems are not efficient. Can the EFF be the first point of call whenever people are unfairly discriminated in those spaces? So we can't just do that in a rush without having systematically framed what has to be done.
Are those in the ANC who are being suspended welcomed here at the Labour desk?
No, look, anyone can come. So if you see the ANC has got a disorder in its own organizational arrangements. There's too much disorder. They can't pay salaries. There's no clarity of who is responsible for what and all of those things there. And that is the attitude which they take to government as well. So there's no center that holds in terms of what happens. So if you want to know something, is that if you want to waste your time, go and meet with any minister of the ANC and complain about something that is happening in government. Instead of them giving you solutions, they're going to join you complaining as well. They will actually say that whether I don't know anything, these things are worse than you're telling me. Even the president, by the way. So like, if people go to him to complain about his government and that how things are not doing well in municipalities and provinces, and instead of him coming with solutions, he joins and complains as well. And that is not leadership. You can't be a leader when people complain, you join in complaining as well. When people complain, you must come with solutions and say, this is what we must do. You don't take your hands and say, no, I don't know what I'm going to do now. You must always provide solutions. But currently, these ones, they don't know what to do. That is why they've got a disorganized organization in the Tuli House and all their provinces and regions. And that attitude is what is obtaining in government. The only thing that they're guaranteed in government is salaries, because they are taking that from the National Revenue Fund. But otherwise, in terms of responsibilities of who is responsible for what, how projects are monitored and all of those things, there is no coordination. That is why you hear the ministers talking across each other, because there is no coordination of what exactly is happening. In the security cluster, in the economic sector as well, there are so many things which are disorientated and disconnected, which otherwise were supposed to supplement each other. But they're not doing that.
Now, my final question to you, Deputy President. What is your wish for South Africa?
The wish for South Africa is that we must achieve economic freedom in our lifetime. And that means that we should remove the ANC from political office and replace it with the revolutionary government of the economic freedom fighters. And then with that power, the political power which will be based on the will of the people, we must reclaim all of South Africa's land for equal redistribution. We must take strategic control and ownership of strategic sectors of the economy, like what Transnet has now, the strategic minerals that are needed. Platinum is a strategic mineral which is needed for now and in the future as an energy source as well. We must have control of that in terms of what should happen. We must build state capacity. Government must be able to perform its own functions, not rely on tenderpreneurs. Every time it has to deliver a service, that it must call out for a tender, which inevitably will lead to bribes. And that is what we are then saying, that let us build internal state capacity to even engage in huge construction programs of huge sophisticated programs. And let us also deal with this issue of industrialization, because the entire African continent, we are just consumers of goods and services that are produced elsewhere. We extract natural resources, we throw them into the sea, they come back as finished goods and products. Virtually everything else that we use here in the African continent comes from outside. The textile which we are wearing, almost all of us, the electronics that we use as phones and as cameras, as microphones, the electronics that we use as household electronics, fridges and televisions and microwaves, virtually, if not all of those, are coming from outside. We need to build internal capacity to industrialize on those sectors. It is going to create jobs for our people, but also it will then boost confidence that we have got some capacity. Here in South Africa, we've got more than 10 million cars. All of them are made outside of South Africa. We only assemble here. They come and assemble there because they want to gain access to the American Growth and Opportunities Act called AGOA. So they come and assemble here so that they can have tax-free or tariff-free entry into the American market. But otherwise, we don't manufacture a single one car. Whilst there can be a capacity that is built to produce our own things much more meaningfully. But also the other thing which a lot of people misunderstand is this issue of development of the African economy. No one must ever imagine that you can develop the African economy or South African economy without developing the entire African economy. Like someone always gives an example that when Japan was industrially expanding faster, it realized that we need to have markets which are closer to us, and then they had to play a role in the development of South Korea. After the Second World War, the American government went to fund a lot of economies in Europe because they wanted a market to dump the goods that they were producing in America. And that is that thing which they called Marshall Plan. So you can't ever imagine that, no, let Zimbabwe focus on its own problems. Let Swaziland focus on its own problems. It's not wise. And there are systemic ways in which we can develop the entire African continent. One is to have proper interconnecting transport systems. We need a railway that connects all the trading centers of the continent, which South Africa must play a role in terms of what should happen. We need the electrification of all of sub-Saharan Africa. The Africa up after the Sahara Desert seems to have electricity, but ourselves this side we don't have. Below the Sahara Desert, we don't have electricity, but we've got Inga Dam in the DRC, which if we finalize that hydro project, we're going to electrify the entire sub-Saharan Africa. Let's have that. Why should there be roaming costs for us to travel from here to Swaziland? I mean, like, we went to Swaziland or to Namibia. Namibia is here. Why should there be why can't these telecommunications companies not have an agreement that there's no need? Let's break those borders first of telecommunications. Why should you need a visa to go to Tanzania? Why should now in the social sector, these artists of Mapiano, they are playing every day. Why should Maporisa or Kabza say I must apply for a visa to go and play in Uganda? Because someone can say no, Kabza tomorrow come to the club. They're then you just take a flight and then take your passport and then enter and then you play and then come back. Why should there be a working visa for intra-African travel? It's irrational. It doesn't make sense. We must be able to, these, I saw an incident elsewhere of a church, of a pastor who had branches of churches in about 8 African countries. And then that pastor passed away. And then the members of the church, senior members of the church, couldn't gain access to the funeral because South Africa says it takes 2 weeks to process a visa from Uganda where the other branches of the church are. What nonsense is that? Like, and it's irrational. It doesn't make sense. And when we talk about the erosion of borders, it's not to say that everyone else must descend and come and stay in South Africa. It's that there must be easier free movement of goods and people. There's currently the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which is a positive step in terms of integrating our economies. But we have to insist that those free traded goods must be made here in the African continent. It must not be Chinese products which are brought into Uganda so that they can gain access freely into neighboring Rwanda or Tanzania or Mozambique or whoever is their neighbor in terms of what happens. So that's one of the issues that they have to be looked into in a much more broader perspective. So part of the things which, as a generation, we cannot avoid is the vision of Kwame Nkrumah, of Haile Selassie, of Sekou Toure, of all those that say that we must unite the African continent, because these neo-colonial subdivided small unviable states are meaningless, are not going to take us out of the neo-colonial clashes and control that continues to define our people. Otherwise, we wish that we must attain economic freedom, not only for the people of South Africa, but for the entire African continent.
Mr. Shivambu, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was yet another exclusive and powerful interview on The Inside Factor. Do watch our interviews every Sunday at 7 p.m. Until next time, good night.